of Dundee City Council, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise, and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the relevant item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Would members of the press and public please not post messages in the chat? Where items are for noting or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the Council, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries, Lord Provost.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Willie, would you do the roll call, please?
Mrs. Hale, complete the roll call, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Lord Provost.
Present.
Councillor Alexander.
I'm here.
Councillor Anderson.
Evening, I'm here.
Deputy Lord Provost.
Present.
Bailey Dawson.
I'm here.
Councillor El Nakla.
Hi, I'm here.
Councillor Flynn.
Good evening, present.
Councillor Hunter.
Good evening, I'm present.
Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Bailey Roberts.
Good evening, I'm here.
Councillor Rome.
Good evening, I'm here.
Bailey Sawers.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Short. Councillor Short.
She is on the call, but I'm not sure if she's hearing. I can see her on screen, but I don't know if she's hearing or not.
I think she's muted.
Okay. Thank you.
But she is there.
Thanks. Councillor Smith.
I'm here.
Councillor Toland.
Hi, I am here.
Bailey Keenan.
Present.
Councillor Cruikshank.
Present.
Councillor Finnegan.
Good evening, I'm here.
Councillor McHugh.
Present.
Councillor McIrvin.
Present.
Councillor Malone.
Yep, I'm here. Let's do this.
Councillor Scullin.
Evening, I'm here.
Councillor Shears.
Evening, present.
Bailey Wright.
Present.
Bailey McPherson.
Good evening, present.
Councillor Coleman.
Good evening.
Councillor Crichton.
Good evening, I'm here.
Councillor Duncan.
Here.
And Bailey Scott.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you, Roger.
Councillor Short wishes to speak, Lord Provost.
Sorry, I was sitting in Linland. My volume was way down, so I didn't realise that my name was getting called. I wondered why it was so quiet. I am here and now paying attention. Sorry, folks.
Delighted you're with us. Thank you. Roger, please go ahead.
Thank you. Lord Provost, members of the Council, there is one item of business this evening, the minutes for information and record purposes.
Thank you, Roger. Any questions, anyone? I see no hands. I see nothing in the chat. So is this agreed? Thank you. That's City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Provost. That concludes the business of the City Council. The next committee is the Climate, Environment and Biodiversity Committee.
Thank you, Roger. I'll just ask Arlene to take us through the agenda. It's one item, but take declarations first.
Thank you, Convener. Item 1, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations?
I can see nothing in the chat or on the screen, so I assume none.
Okay, that takes us on to item 2, Food Safety Service Plan 2023 to 25. You have this for approval.
Thanks, Arlene. So Food Standards Scotland oversees the delivery of food safety controls and includes work carried out by local authorities. Local authorities must produce a food safety service plan to set out how they will fulfil their statutory duties in relation to food safety across their area. This report relates to the Food Safety Service Plan for Dundee for 2023 to 25. It provides information on recent performance, including our continued recovery from the disruption to the delivery of food interventions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The food safety team continue to work extremely hard to protect our citizens and visitors to the city to promote good practice in food safety. There are around 1,600 food businesses registered in Dundee, and the team typically carry out over 1,300 inspections each year. The committee are asked to approve the Food Safety Service Plan on pages 3 to 24 in Appendix 1 and remit implementation to the Executive Director. I'm wondering if there are questions. I can see that there is a question from Michael Crichton.
Thank you, Convener. No, just it's a really well written service plan, and my question is just in relation to allergens. 2 million people in the UK are affected by allergens, and the service plan alludes to legislation about full ingredient information on pre-packaged food. Can I ask how this will be monitored and spot checked around the city, and how do we know if it will be complied with?
Thanks, Councillor Crichton. I'll bring in Mr. Stirling to respond to that. It's got a technical question.
But thanks, Convener. I can provide more detail. I'll check with the team, but effectively, this is now part of the inspection programme, and our officers will check on compliance with that aspect of the regulation as they're completing their inspection. So it's included in the inspection programme to check compliance with the requirements around allergens.
Councillor Crichton, do you want to come back with a follow-up question? Or?
No, thanks. I guess this it just was a technical question, as in I read it, and obviously I know it's a UK-wide plan, but it's just I just had a question about how it will be implemented. But I guess as Mr. Stirling has alluded to, I guess that'll just be a general check and overview. So probably I might come back to this when it comes into force.
I have to say, as somebody who ran a cafe for years in a food business, I'm absolutely delighted to be on this side of the fence. So I can't see any other questions. Are people happy to approve the service plan and remit implementation to the service directors? I can see no dissent, so I'll take that as agreed. That's the end of our committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The next committee is the Fair Work, Economic Growth and Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you, Roger, and good evening, everyone. Arlene, can you start us off, please?
Thanks, Convener. Item 1, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations?
I'm not seeing any declarations just now. I suppose I have a declaration for item 9. It's a non-financial interest via my deputy convenership of Tayside contracts, but I don't think this is particularly relevant, but I suppose I'll just put it there for safety's sake. Anyone else, anything? No, we'll move on then, please.
Thank you. That takes us on to item 2, Dundee City Council, variation of waiting restrictions order 2023. You're asked to make the order.
So I'm sure you can all see the order in front of you in the agenda, which was duly advertised before objections were received. The committee is asked to make the order despite the objections. Can I have agreement for this, please? Thank you. I'll take that as agreement.
Item 3, tree preservation order, garden ground to west of 13B Richmond Terrace. This is for noting.
Again, you'll have that in front of you in your papers. So this site is located within the West End Suburbs Conservation Area. The TPO will serve to protect and preserve the arboreal amenity of the area. No objections were received. Bailey McPherson, I can see you've got a question. Please go ahead.
Thanks, convener. I'm pleased to see this being confirmed subject to committee approval tonight. The background to this, though, is this is the second application. Earlier in the spring, there was an initial one, which ended up, if I'm being frank about it, ended up being rubber stamped due to lack of staff resource on the forestry side to actually inspect the situation within the statutory 6 weeks. And I spoke to Mr. Boyle at the time about this because obviously I had a concern that some trees ended up effectively being approved for removal, which was of great upset to the neighbouring community. Now, Mr. Boyle did give me an assurance at that time that staffing was being progressed. I could say I told you so, because we in our budget amendment this year suggested an extra forestry officer, and I'm pleased to say that Mr. Boyle said that was progressing. I would just really like the assurance, Mr. Boyle, that we're confident now that if these come forward, it will be possible to ensure that, as in the case of the second application, it's inspected in good time, and therefore the statutory responsibility within the 6 weeks is met, and so that we don't, if you like, rubber stamp these applications.
Thanks, Bailey McPherson. It's a bit of an odd one coming to this committee, but I can see that Mr. Boyle is in the call. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer your question. So, Mr. Boyle.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey McPherson. Bailey McPherson is correct. We had that conversation several months ago, and indeed I'm happy to confirm arrangements are in place to ensure that does not happen again.
That's much appreciated, Mr. Boyle. I should say, I think anybody who's dealt with forestry, I think it's no criticism of the forestry staff. I think they do a really good job. I think the additional admin resource of late has been really helpful as well. So grateful to Mr. Boyle for that response. Thank you.
Thanks again for that response, and thank you very sure you appreciate your kind comments, Bailey McPherson. Can we move on, please, Arlene?
Thank you. That takes us on to item 4, Development Plan Scheme 2023. This is for approval.
So this is quite a technical report. It's just seeking approval of the 2023 Development Plan Scheme that sets out in detail the process and timescales for the review of the Dundee Local Development Plan. The report also summarises the feedback that's been received from stakeholders following consultation on the draft plan statement. I can see Councillor Shears, you'd like a comment on this, please.
Thank you. It's not really a comment on what's in the report, although it is a very good report and very well written, interesting to read. It's just a comment on some terminology on pages 5 and 13. The DCC response, text alteration to all members of the community, including minor groups, younger citizens, disabled people, gypsies and travellers. In some circles, gypsies is considered a slur, so I was just wondering if we could change that to the GRT community and just kind of keep up to date on our terminology and prevent any unintended offence for people that may read it.
I think that's a perfectly fair comment, and I don't think that there'll be an issue with that. But Mr. Hamilton, care to come in on that, please?
Convener, happy to confirm with appropriate colleagues that we're using the correct terminology and to make any amendments necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, please.
Yeah, thanks there, convener. Just whilst I appreciate that at this stage, this report is largely about process, aligned participation. I'm really looking to ask officers for an assurance that in calling for ideas for possible inclusion in the plan, it will take account of some of the concerns that have been raised at Planning Committee and elsewhere in the past, certainly since I've been elected, regarding, significant new housing developments in my ward and elsewhere. I'm thinking of, for example, Balgillo Heights and the associated Clearwater and Ferry fields, which come to round about some 500 odd residences in my ward, and there isn't a single shop, there's not a bus service. Now, I know that myself and others have talked over the years about what seems like a good idea of 20-minute communities, but I'm really just trying to drive home the point that, you know, when the council talks the talk, we really need to have to take action to not allow more of these vast new developments. Perfectly nice houses, I mean, nothing wrong with them, but they are, by their nature, almost entirely car dependent. So I'm just looking for the assurances that, you know, these sort of concerns will be taken on board.
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Hamlet come in a second. I'm sure we answer that for you. My understanding is this is the plan before the plan, so it's really more of a technical consultation. But Mr. Hampson?
Convener, thank you. Yes, you are correct. This report sets out the process that we will follow in reviewing the local development plan and the various stages that are involved in that. It begins with evidence gathering before we go on to formulate some thoughts about what might be contained in the replacement plan. But I think the points made by Councillor Duncan are recognised. There's a lot of learning that we get on a regular and ongoing basis through the planning committee, and the various issues that are discussed in that forum will be taken into consideration as we bring forward the various stages of the plan to this committee for approval.
That's most reassuring, Mr. Hamilton, because I appreciate that at this point it's about process, but I'm just grateful that these sort of concerns will be taken aboard at some point in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Thanks, Mr. Hamilton. See no further questions, so can the statement be agreed, please? Take that as agreement. We'll move on then, please, Arlene.
Item 5, Retail Study 2023. You have this for approval.
So this report provides an overview of the key outcomes of a review conducted by Roderick McLean Associates and Riding It into the Future of Retailing in Dundee. The review provides an up-to-date understanding of the retail landscape within the city's network of centres, and forms part of the evidence gathering that will inform the review of the Dundee Local Development Plan. The committee is asked to note the outcomes of the review and approve the Retail Study 2023 as a material planning consideration. And I challenge anyone else to read that whilst things pop up on their screen. I can see, as I say, I think it's Councillor Coleman first. Daniel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Convener. With regard to the retail vacancy rates on page 61, the shop vacancy rates are a concern, and whilst I appreciate this is a national, not just local issue, our city centre has a higher vacancy rate than the Scottish average, and that adds to that concern. Whilst appreciating most of these units will not be council owned, I would ask what active engagement there is with site owners around this, noting that the vacancy rate of the Wellgate Centre is currently actually 35%. And I note at 7.5.1, the report indicates a mismatch between supply of suitable units and demand, and it would be desirable to reduce the proportion of vacant units. But essentially, how is this best achieved?
Mr. Hampson?
Thank you, Convener. Members will recall that in October of last year, we brought forward a draft city centre strategic investment plan that, amongst other things, did recognise the oversupply of retail floor space that exists within the city centre, and brought forward ideas about how some of that floor space could be repurposed so that the vacancy rates that Councillor Coleman references will come down. Over the last year, since that plan was made public, we've engaged with a number of private sector owners and talk through various plans that may be considered for some of the sites with vacant premises. And we would continue to do that as matters move forward. We obviously just talked in the last item about the review of the local development plan, and that gives us an opportunity to think about the policy context that guides development and change of use of some of those premises. And I think in the context of both that plan and the city centre plan, we will be flexible in finding different uses for ground floor premises and properties within the shopping centres that will ensure that the city centre is not full of vacant units, but is a vibrant and attractive place to spend time.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Does that answer your question, Councillor Coleman?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, please.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Just looking at page 67, it mentions the Broughty Ferry shopping district in my wards, which I think most of us will know is quite a very long established and thankfully quite vibrant shopping district. I happened to mention to some people from the Broughty Ferry Traders Association that this was coming before committee tonight, and they couldn't recall having been approached for any input regarding this. So I'm just a wee bit, I don't know if that's true or not, I'm just really looking for comments, because I would have thought that the authors of such a report would, you know, almost as a first port of call, go to one of the longest established trading businesses, you know, associations in Dundee. So just looking for comments around that.
Okay, Mr. Hamilton, are you aware of the approaches they've made?
Convener, the process of preparing this retail review did not involve engagement with business owners within the city centre or the district centres. It was more a technical and data analysis piece of research rather than the qualitative side of things. But clearly, as we move forward now with the review of the local development plan, this report is an important part of the evidence gathering. And as we start to bring forward ideas for the future of the city centre, district centres and retail more generally within the city, the opportunity for those stakeholders to engage in the process and for us to talk to them will be at that point rather than through this retail study itself. So that time will come, Councillor Duncan.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hamilton. I'll be happy to pass that on to the traders, because I know that they're certainly keen to be consulted, and I would have thought that the council would like to make use of their long-held knowledge as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I note that Councillor Shears has withdrawn his question because it's the same as Councillor Coleman's. So move on to Councillor McHugh. Dorothy, you've got a question and a comment?
Yes, thank you. I would echo the earlier comments. This is a good report, well written and easy to read, and very useful. I'd like to draw attention to item 10.8.1, page 89 of the bundle, where it speaks about information gaps, lack of up-to-date information on public perceptions and footfall. Now, this would clearly be useful information. And I just wonder what can be done to address this gap in the medium and longer term. I also have a comment, if I could please come back after this question.
Of course. Mr. Hamilton?
I mean, we're always keen to try and get a better understanding, not just of some of the data that governs the success of the centre, but talking to stakeholders, as referenced by Councillor Duncan in the previous question. We're also in the process of gathering additional footfall information within the city centre so that we can monitor on a regular basis the number of people that are in the city centre. And then as we go into the evidence gathering stages that inform the local development plan, there will be opportunities to talk to many more people. I think there is a challenge within the resource that we have within the planning team. I think there has been, as members will be aware, quite a focus on the city centre over the last couple of years with the preparation of the city centre plan. We will try, as part of the local development plan, to talk to people within the district shopping centres as well, and indeed some of the other neighbourhood centres, just to gain that understanding and talk to stakeholders and communities themselves about what their feelings and perceptions are. And it's all part of that understanding of place that is so important through the local development plan process. So I think we're about to start on what is a very significant piece of work in reviewing the local development plan, but hopefully some of those information gaps that are referenced within the retail study can start to be filled in through that process.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I'm sure all members on the call tonight, we can still call it that, will be taking that back to the communities. That the consultation will be coming down the road, and it's very reassuring. Councillor McHugh, you had a comment as well, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Gregor, for that. That's reassuring. My comment relates to the integrated impact assessment, page 146 of your bundle. And similar to my colleagues' comments on an earlier report, could I draw report writers' attention to the use of the word elderly when speaking about older people? Can we please use the term older people going forward? Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton, have we got that noted?
Yes, convener, we'll note that one as well. I think it relates to a separate report, but yes, we'll pick that one up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor McHugh. Councillor Lynn, you're next, please.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I found this report particularly interesting, very, very detailed, and I think it'll be very useful in determining the new local development plan. Just a tiny point on the map at 2.1, the primary and secondary catchment areas. I'm wondering why Newport and Tayport are not within the primary catchment area, given that they just faces across the river and they don't have any supermarkets, etc. So I'd imagine that a lot of people from these areas will consider Dundee to be the primary catchment area. I wonder if someone could answer that.
Mr. Hampson?
Convener, there's a certain amount of expertise that we go to consultants for in order to get the type of data and analysis that this retail study includes. I can't answer the question, but I'm happy to raise that with the consultants that did this work on our behalf and come back to Councillor Lynn with the response.
Thank you.
Thank you. And putting you on the spot slightly, but as you say, that's what they were for. So if you get back to him, that would be, I'm sure, much appreciated. Councillor Alexander, we've got you next.
Thanks very much, convener. Just to ask officers, in terms of the approach that we take going forward, and I'm happy to give credit to DC Thompsons for this one. I thought they did a fantastic job of pulling together data which related to particularly the city centre, with an overlay of maps which showed in very great detail, I suppose, a live representation of vacancies and those that were occupied. I suppose my question is not just about using what is publicly available. Do we have an equivalent to have active monitoring of our district centres and our city centre to understand where those vacancies are popping up in real time? If not, can we? And the second part of that is, I think we all recognise that across district and city centres there are huge challenges with retail, and you said in some of your earlier remarks, Gregor, that we have an oversupply, which I think we would all recognise given the nature of city centres, and shopping has changed significantly, and there's a section in the report around online shopping. In terms of taking forward that proposal around the city centre investment strategy, can you maybe just give a very brief comment on the work of our city centre manager in terms of the work that she does on an ongoing basis to assist, I suppose, the commercial entities that might want to occupy some of those vacant spaces? Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton, have you got that?
So, thanks, convener. In relation to the first point, we don't have the information about vacancies coming through in real time within the district shopping centres. We do regularly visit the district centres, and we have a database that we can monitor and track change, not just in terms of vacancies, but within the type of units that are occupying some of the space. And clearly, there is always going to be churn in terms of units that are occupied falling vacant, and the concern is principally when those vacant units aren't reoccupied then by somebody new. And we do monitor the general health of the district centre over time, but not to the extent that you mentioned, Councillor Alexander. But it is something that we're always trying to find new ways of being able to keep up to date and have the right data to make the decisions that are appropriate. In relation to the second point and the role of the city centre manager, clearly the city centre manager is responsible for the two city centre ambassadors. So we do have people on the streets of the city centre regularly monitoring change. So we do have that real-time information. When they see shop fitters in doing something, they'll go in and try and find out what is happening there. And where vacancies exist, the city centre manager is active in engaging with the marketing agents and the owner of the property to try and understand the efforts that they're going to make availability of those units known to as many people as possible. She also regularly engages with people who might be looking for space within the city centre and almost trying to do that matchmaking process of identifying suitable units for particular uses. And that involves liaising with property colleagues if the unit is owned by the council, or planning colleagues to ensure that the right uses are taking place in the right buildings. I think through the City Centre Strategic Investment Plan, we now have a strong basis for marketing not just the city centre as it is today, but also the ambitions about what we want the city centre to be in the future. And I think that document is providing, a compelling offer to prospective investors, and I think there is quite a degree of interest in some of the vacant units in certain streets within the city centre, which is positive. But we continue to work with and monitor the situation and try and support investors to think about Dundee when they're making decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I see no further questions on this item, so can this be agreed? Thank you. I'll take that as agreement. Next item then, please, Arlene.
That takes us on to item 6, Sustainable Transport Delivery Plan. You're asked to agree the recommendation.
I'll just give it a minute for all the things to ping through. This item sets out the Council's 10-year plan for infrastructure aimed to improve sustainable travel in the city and support our transition to net zero. The plan is aligned with the new regional transport strategy, which is currently out for public consultation and provides a secondary layer of detail on the local objectives in Dundee. The report highlights an ambitious programme of £230 million of potential external investment in the city's sustainable transportation infrastructure, which is dependent on external funding availability. Detailed consultation will be progressed on individual projects during various stages of the development, and this committee will be updated on projects as they progress. And I just, on a personal note, I'd like to note the efforts of officers to get this project to completion, and also of Councillor Flynn, who's put so much into this to get it where it is just now. And very appreciative of all the feedback that's been given by others as well to get this to the stage that it now is. Obviously, as I've just said, this is going to go out to consultation for partners, and no one thinks that it's in a perfect format, but that's what this document is. It's a starter, and it's an acknowledgement of all the hard work that's been done in the city to date. So that being said, I can see I've got questions here. So Councillor Flynn, can I have you first, please?
Thank you, Convener, and thanks for the kind words there, because I think you had a massive input in this as well. And I think it's important in this particular climate week that much of this is actually welcomed. And I think it's important to actually highlight much of what we've done in it. I think the team have done a fantastic job over recent years in getting this to this culmination of having this Sustainable Transport Delivery Plan in front of us is really welcome. I think we'll actually look at our active travel or sustainable transport model in general. Active travel has been something which we've been promoting for such a long time, with all the great work done in Riverside, all the Broughty Ferry work, the Broughty Ferry to Montefieth route, which is in process. And I think it's really just goes to show that's where we're putting in the first segregated cycle lane, for example, within the city, setting this standard where we should be going forward. And there's much going on with regards to Bell Street, as you know yourself. And I think there's much to be said about this as being a very much a positive report and a very much a positive document for the city. I think the city are doing a fantastic job here with 21-hour zones we're putting across the city, the school streets, and notwithstanding our advances in electric vehicle infrastructure. I think the team will work fantastically well with the electric vehicles, not just in the transition of our fleet in its own, but also making sure the infrastructure's in there to support the transition and help people within the city do that transition. As I said, being Climate Week, really welcome the fact that we're actually bringing this to the committee this week above all weeks, because I think it's really important. As I say, thanks to the team and yourself for the input we've had in this. I've just got a few questions, if that's okay, Convener, with regards to bus stops, and firstly, with regards to that's in the report, but I'd like to know when we'd be expecting the discussions with the officers around the bus shelters, bus stops, because there's no point in having a sustainable transport programme if we actually looking at reducing bus stops in many ways, because we're trying to encourage people to use bus stops. You need shelters to keep them. The weather today has not been too bad, but yesterday you can actually explain why we probably need bus shelters in Dundee in some cases. And secondly, if it's okay, Convener, I'll just throw another question there with regards to the Tayside Bus Alliance and the Bus Partnership Fund. There's much money being put into the city from Scottish Government and UK Government over recent years with regards to EV infrastructure, active travel infrastructure. Now we're looking at bus partnership funds with regards to bus prioritisation. So there's a lot of money coming in here, a lot of support, and if these bus prioritisation routes come to fruition, can I maybe get some feedback from officers, which might be helpful for the members to understand, is what are we expecting back from the bus companies who have been supported through a number of years through different funds from the government? Because if we're only looking at reducing times for a bus route, for example, where we save maybe a minute and a half, should we not be expecting more with regards to supporting the residents in the city, the citizens of the city, to encourage them to use sustainable transport, but also with the investment being put in, to expect to see something for the benefit of the citizens of the city?
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, for your comments and your questions. I see Mr. McNaughton is on the call. I'm sure he's been making notes, so hopefully he can answer that for you. Mr. McNaughton?
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. Thank you for the question, Councillor Flynn. In terms of the bus priority fund, we're entering into the second stage of the stag assessment process, which is the detailed assessment and evaluation. Again, depending on how the journey time savings could potentially correspond with others nationally, that will provide us with a better understanding through Transport Scotland on the funders of how these compare and compete, particularly with other bids that are in the system as well, to find out if these will actually be getting taken forward. So that's the first stage point, to see if these will be viable for funding. As you know, part of the subject conditions will be that we get something back in return for the public investment from the bus companies. Some of those things may include, but would be subject to negotiation, things like guaranteed service frequency increases, possibly fares as well may come into that. But again, that would be subject to negotiation, and we'd only be entering into that once we determine whether or not these are viable contenders, these bus priority corridors for going forward. In terms of the bus stops, again, we do need to work through that bus priority assessment first to find out whether or not these will be on corridors. And again, we will undertake the assessment on any potential rationalisation of bus stops in conjunction with stakeholders, including the elected members.
Thank you, Mr. McNaughton. Does that fully answer your question, Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, just say thanks again, Convener. Thanks again for the team for putting this document together, because I think it's something the city should be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll take Councillor Crichton now. Councillor Crichton?
Thank you, Convener. It's just to go on from what Councillor Flynn said about bus rationalisation. The principle of bus rationalisation, if it's going to make it better for the city and better for the uses, I'm not totally against it as long as it works. But I'm just wondering, I think if Mr. McNaughton can confirm about, we need real consultation on this. I think especially in my ward, the streets like Perth Road and Blackness Road, what we need is real consultation with citizens about what bus stops and bus shelters are actually used, because we don't want vulnerable citizens having to walk huge lengths, because that obviously defeats the whole point of what we're trying to do in our city, is encourage bus travel and to get people away from their vehicles. So I'm just wondering about the consultation aspect of the bus rationalisation and actually how we are going to actually do it.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. I think I would reassure you by saying that no one wants to force people to walk a longer distance necessary nearest bus stop. I think a large part of this rationalisation is looking at areas that are over-provided with bus stops and fall within that multiple provision within 400 metres. But Mr. McNaughton, can you confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the question. It will be data informed, so we've got very good records via the bus companies through the digital ticketing for how many people use bus stops, and again, that will influence the assessment for this. So the first point of call will be looking at ones with no use or in near proximity to others. As noted in the report, we're looking at 400 metre spacing being the optimum, which is again the guidance for bus stop spacing. And again, we'll be targeting for recommendation stops with nominal usage, or again ones where they can be consolidated within space as well. We will consult with stakeholders, and we will also bring back proposals to committee to decide on as well.
Thank you, Mr. McNaughton. That's very helpful. Councillor Crichton, anything further?
No, thank you, Mr. McNaughton, for that. And no, I totally get it, and I think my group and I definitely understand anything that can make Dundee's transport more efficient is welcomed, and just if it's data driven, but it just needs to be real consultation. I think the word consultation is banded about a lot, but sometimes isn't done correctly. So if it can be done with stakeholders, then it can just be a great bus service for the whole city. So thank you, Mr. McNaughton.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. Councillor Coleman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Convener. As the delivery plan alludes to page 128, over 40% of Dundee households have no access to a car. So indeed, a good public transport infrastructure is indeed vital for the city. Our group has repeatedly raised the lack of up-to-date bus timetables at bus stops and sensed that progress with dealing with this is tortuously slow. And I'd be grateful for an update and assurance of progress is on this. Many citizens, particularly those who are perhaps less affluent or older people, do not have access to a smartphone, and for them to check the apps to check the timetable, and that is not an option for them. And can I also ask officers if the cut to bus shelter cleaning frequency was not in hindsight indeed a false economy, given the number of complaints about filthy bus shelters in parts of the city, including the city centre?
I'll bring in Councillor McNaughton in the first stage. I don't know if he can fully answer that question for you, but Mr. McNaughton?
Yeah, certainly, thanks. In terms of bus stop timetables, we are working our way through changing them all. It's quite a manual exercise to do it with. It has been impacted by changes to bus routes, bus frequencies as well. So again, it's something that we're working through. As noted in the report, over the 10-year of this plan, we are recommending that we review the level of provision for printed bus timetables. And again, this is in line with other services becoming more modern. Again, as noted in the report, the bus timetables, they hark from a day before the internet. And again, it's whether or not that's still appropriate going forward. But for the time being, anyway, we are looking at replacing the timetables. In terms of the bus shelter frequency, again, that was agreed by committee. I can say it is a regional standard, the frequency that's promoted, and again, we run the same frequency as our neighbouring authorities under the same contract for that as well. We do have provision to do spot cleans, and again, we work with the bus companies as well to identify where that's located required.
Thank you, Mr. McNaughton. I think that was a very full and frank answer. I think I may have demoted you briefly by calling you Councillor McNaughton, so apologies for that. We'll move on. I believe Bailey McPherson is next.
Thanks, Convener. Really a comment, and it's really about balance. If we look on page 117, the hierarchy in terms of priority is, first of all, walking and wheeling. And frankly, virtually everybody is a pedestrian. Secondly, cycling, and thirdly, public transport. And obviously, and quite rightly, we put the private car at the bottom of the heap. And we want to be encouraging all three. And I have a concern, and it's been alluded to already by my colleagues, in relation to, I heard Mr. McNaughton's response on the timetables. I've just got tired of the number of times I have raised this issue. And it's raised by constituents who, as Councillor Coleman alluded to, have no access to a smartphone and an app. And that will be the case for many constituents right across the city, who many citizens of the city. And if I'm being honest, I think that in relation to this, we are falling behind our neighbours. I mean, coming out of COVID, Perth and Kinross and Angus, and I think some of them might use the bus companies rather than the local authority for the provision of timetables. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is, I've had a constituent who's sent me bus timetables on bus stops in both neighbouring authorities, and I think in Fife as well. And I think we got to the stage, to put it in context, 250 of our 900 bus stops have up-to-date timetables on them. So the majority do not. Now, I fully accept that bus shelters, that's a different issue. There's real-time information, fine. But a great many people do not alight get on a bus at a bus shelter. They do so at a bus stop, and the majority of them are frankly, without up-to-date timetable information. And I have to say, a lot of the facings are graffitied, and it just doesn't give an impression that we are investing in what is the council's responsibility. And Councillor Coleman also alluded to shelters. Some of them are filthy, and look on the top. If you're sitting on the top of a bus, just look down at the, some of them haven't had a wash on the top of them for years, but the main thing is the glass or perspex, and they really do need to be washed properly. And I simply say this, that I fully accept that the delivery plan on page 137 is really, as you correctly say, Convener, alluding to external funding. If we tot up the active freeway expenditure, it would be £100 million into the long term. That's a heck of a lot of money. Fully accept we'd be looking for a large chunk of that to come from Sustrans. But the point I would make is that we've cut bus shelter cleaning. The pavement, as I say, virtually everybody is a pedestrian. In 2015-16, the pavement revenue budget was 1.332 million that year. It's 690,000 this year. The capital for footways has reduced, as has the capital on non-adopted assets as well. And I simply say this, it's vitally important in all three parts of the hierarchy. Walking and wheeling first, cycling second, public transport third, that we are seen to be investing in all of them. And I really do feel there is a need for real impetus in terms of ensuring that our bus infrastructure, which is the bit we're responsible for, not running the actual buses, but having good quality infrastructure, because I genuinely feel we could be doing better in that way. Simply a comment, Convener, but I think it is echoed by a great many constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McPherson. And obviously, I've got sympathies there for the issues you raised. I think everyone that's here tonight would acknowledge the difficult issues that local authorities have had for the last 14 years or so in terms of austerity. And I'm sure Mr McNaught would love to have a great deal of more money in his budget in order to address these issues. What I can say is that we'll continue to look for external funding support and for every possible avenue to improve our services as we have done so far. But I think, just to get back to things a little bit, there's been a lot of focus, rightly so, on the bus infrastructure. This is a wider report about the achievements so far and the ambitions going forward over the next 10 years. And I would again commend your attention to everything that's been done in terms of the forward-looking and ambitious nature of the project, indeed all the projects that are in this. Bailey Keenan, I've got you next, please.
Convener, I'm in favour of a sustainable transport policy. Have got some issues in relation to the prioritising routes for buses through the town, and you were at the same presentation I was at, so it'll not be a surprise to you when I repeat what I said then. Officers at that meeting had advised that to get the 22 bus into town 2 minutes earlier, we could be spending somewhere in the region of £18 million. And when we look at budgets, and we were looking at budgets at that time, and at that time, the council were prepared to cut, or did cut, £300,000 or £300,000 from El Sistema, which was 500 kids getting tutoring in music. And so when it comes to priorities and what we set as a city, then I think they need to take all these things into account and, no look towards the city to cough up a lot more money to make the 22 bus or a few others that minute earlier getting into town. There is something went wrong for the point of view of buses, and the number of people that are using them has dwindled. I think that the bus companies perhaps need to look at themselves for that, given that a lot of times the buses aren't running, or they're cancelled, and there's no another alternative out the town, or they're in take a taxi or walk. So I'm not in favour. I'm in favour of officers going and looking, but if it comes to priorities on where to look for money, then look for the things that are going to deliver to people, such as the food banks that we're needing to support, the El Sistema that we'd want to keep, or the Blether bus that we'd like to keep on, rather than sort of suggesting, let's go and spend 18 million quid on making a bus 2 minutes earlier in the town. That's just ridiculous. It's know what I came into politics for. So I'm likely to oppose it when you come up with that, if that's what it is.
I'm frankly utterly confused by your comments, Bailey Keenan, because again, I was in that meeting and what we're talking about is capital and revenue, which are two totally different things. Being able to support something in an ongoing manner and being able to invest in the city in a one-off manner to have improved services. So I think we'll have to agree to disagree with that.
Whether it's capital or revenue or not, convener, if it comes to spending 18 or it comes to spending money on education for kids, I'm putting it to education.
Yeah, I'm going to move on because I can't see any further questions. Can I ask, is there agreement for this item on the Sustainable Transport Delivery Plan, remind people? Sorry, Councillor Anderson, you had a question. My apologies. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I was just coming in to say what a fantastic report it is, and I wanted to celebrate the table that is on page 137 about all the investment. I wanted to remind people that this is the start of Scottish Climate Week, and the list of projects there are very much about investing in the future, investing in sustainable transport, and at the same time investing in protecting people in Dundee from the impacts of climate change. As part of Climate Week, I was contributing towards a short film about the Broughty Ferry to Moneyfeith active travel route. Not only, as Councillor Flynn referred to earlier, has this put 5 miles of fully segregated walkway and cycleway into operation, it's provided over 1,100 metres of flood protection and installed 24 floodgates. Now that's not only protecting the residents along our coastline, but it's protecting 450 businesses. So I think what we're trying to do with the climate intervention work is both improve the quality of life of our residents, protect them from the impact of climate change, and also enhance biodiversity. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the committee was aware of the fact that there's going to be a celebration on Saturday in the city square. It's called the Re-City Celebration, and it's going to have workshops, free activities, live music. There's going to be the Campy Growers, the Botanic Gardens will be there, Zero Waste Scotland, the Countryside Rangers, the Eden Project, MMV Baldovi, the Dundee Cycle Hub. So it's all about reimagining, remaking and reconnecting our city. So it's a free event from 10 to 4. And I hope I'll see lots of you there on Saturday celebrating the fact that we're doing what we can to mitigate climate change. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. And again, I think very pertinent to report on sustainable transport, I would remind members. So given those comments, can this report be agreed? Thank you. I'll take that as agreement. Next item, please, Arlene.
That takes us on to item 7, Disabled Persons Parking Places Annual Review. This is for approval.
Thank you. So this item provides an update on disabled bay installations and removals over the last 12 months and requests approval to vary the relevant traffic regulation order to confirm these changes. Do you have any questions or comments on this item? Just give it a minute. I don't see any. Can this then be agreed? Thank you. The next item then, please.
Item 8, Pavement Parking Exemption Order. Can I advise committee that Fleming Gardens East, West and North and Wedderburn Street are no longer proposed for inclusion in the recommendations? And that takes us on to the report which you have for approval.
Thank you, Arlene. So this item seeks approval for the preparation of an exemption order to exempt roads from the forthcoming national footway parking prohibition. The footway parking prohibition is expected to come into force in December this year following the completion of the secondary legislation. Exemption locations identified in the report will be subject to statutory consultation and public notice, and any objections received will be reported back to this committee for consideration. I believe it was Councillor Crichton first. Councillor Crichton?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm pretty confused with the exemptions in my ward, the West End ward, as indicated on page 142. I have no problem and indeed welcome the 3 exemptions, but wonder why Abbotsford Street is excluded while Abbotsford Place and Corso Street are included. These 3 streets, as you'll know, are extremely similar in dynamic and all were being to be considered. Is the exclusion of Abbotsford Street simply an admin error, or I'm just kind of wondering what the rationale for this, because the streets are extremely similar and have the same issues really.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. Mr. McNaughton, are you able to advise?
Thank you, Convener. I don't have the exact details on that one to hand, but I'm happy to come back to Councillor Crichton afterwards. I assume it will be to do with the volume of existing pavement parking, which is within these areas. But again, I'll come back with a further detail on that.
Thank you, Mr. McNaughton. Is that acceptable, Councillor Crichton?
Yeah, I'll pick up outside committee with Mr.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Shears, please.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a couple of questions that are wildly different, so I'll ask my first one first, if that's okay, and then move on to the second.
Okay, that makes sense.
My first one is about notification and enforcement. So how are people going to be notified that their street is or isn't in the exemption? And when it comes to enforcement, are we going to be taking on extra staff to enforce this? Because I imagine it's going to create a lot of work for our traffic wardens in the initial few months as people get used to it.
Mr. McNaughton?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. So in terms of publicity, it is a national parking prohibition, and the understanding is that there'll be some national comms being done about the advertisement of when this does come in, which is currently targeted for as early as December. From our point of view, we're looking at ramping up enforcement actions, starting on the known problem locations where they cause a lot of complaints, where we're currently receiving in a lot of complaints about problematic footway parking, rather than just doing a blanket coverage throughout the city centre to start with. Sorry, throughout the entire city to start with. With regards to the exemption locations, while they are pending, we will not be undertaking enforcement action on these locations. And again, we will notify any members of any residents of these streets of such while these are pending, going through the statutory processes.
Thanks. And my second question is on, it kind of ties in to Councillor Crichton's question. If when the scheme comes in and residents are finding that not being able to park on their street, whether that's a couple of wheels to make the road a bit wider, or there is just no parking spaces nearby, which is a real issue in the ferry, as it stands, will there be any means or scheme for residents to apply for their street being exempted?
Yep. Thank you for the follow-up question on that. We will have the means of requesting in further exemptions for it. It's a difficult balance, so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer about what is exempt, but we are trying to limit the number of exemptions. I appreciate there's a list of about 30 locations in front of you, but this does only represent 1%, less than 1% of the footpath length in the city. So we are trying to limit it to just locations where we've got existing problems. And again, it's that trying to marry off the displacement problems and some of the accessibility concerns as well. So we're not looking at expanding the exemptions further, but again, we will listen to any requests that come in through our usual channels.
Thanks very much. Answer your question, Councillor Shears? Yeah, thank you.
Yep, greatly appreciated.
Thanks. Councillor Anderson, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just say I very much welcome the legislation. As a very avid pedestrian, I quite like walking on pavements without cars mounting on or off them. And it follows on a bit from Mr. Shears, Councillor Shears' last comment. My understanding survey, and that the exemptions that are coming forward here as amended are the exemptions. And I would be seeking assurance that you've looked at all the available opportunities for pavement parking, and this is the list where we'll be allowing it to happen, and there shouldn't be endless extensions to this list. Can you give me some assurance that you are confident that there won't be additions to this list?
I would maybe just say, Heather, just before Mr. McNaughton answers, that obviously, like, we'll have to look at things on a case-by-case basis, but the intention is not to keep rolling this out across. Obviously, it's a nationwide ban. We're derogating in very specific areas. But Mr. McNaughton.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So we have assessed the great length, the entire of the road network, and this is the officer recommendation for the full list. We're not recommending any further exemptions at all. As noted, things change in time. However, Car growth is, car ownership is targeted through a number of interventions to reduce. It's been something that's been on a continual increase path in the past. So again, it is targeted to be at peak car at the moment, now declines. So some of these issues shouldn't get any worse. But yeah, we're not looking, we've not got any recommendations. There's no officer recommendation to expand this list.
Thank you. That's reassuring. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman, for you next, please.
Convener, could I just say Councillor Coleman's having some IT issues at the minute, so is unable to ask his question, but we'll take it up directly with Mr McNaughton.
Thank you, Bailey McPherson. That's very helpful. Councillor Short next then, please.
Thank you, Convener. My question is really about the raison d'etre for having non-pavement parking in the first place. Anybody who's ever wandered down a pavement with a pram or tried to navigate it with a wheelchair or walked along with someone who has problems with their eyesight, having a car as a blockage is obviously a major issue. When this goes out as TROs with a view to making exemptions, what kind of conversations will you be having with the various organisations that represent those that the legislation was originally brought in to support and recognise the problems that they have day to day? I don't think we've got Jeff Hackett on the call at the moment, but Jeff will very much confirm that I'm on just about every second day about bins that wander across the pavements, and I get emails in to say, oh, it's wandered again, can you ask them to make sure that it's sitting where it should be because it causes a disruption. We have legislation that I'm sure Mr Presswood and Mr Hamilton will talk about with regards to A-boards on pavements, and neither of these move. Cars move. And so it's a bit of a concern of me that we're actually having any exceptions at all. But I'd like to hear who and how you're actually discussing these things with the wider communities that represent, please.
Merci bien, Conseiller Short. À vous, Monsieur McNaughton.
Don't speak French, but thanks very much, Convener. The again, just to reiterate, it is less than 1% of the footpath network that we are looking to promote for exemption here. In terms of some of the charitable organisations like Living Streets who have campaigned very proactively, again, part of the reason for the support for the national prohibition, that has been done at a national level. And again, it's their views were taken on board at the national level with formulating the prohibition legislation and also the exemptions as well. So those conversations have been done. What we're now getting into is very much the local level. So again, the public noticing and objection process. This is really getting into the realms of the detail of individual streets rather than the principles of it. As I say, from a principle point of view, 99% of the footpath network will be subject to prohibition. There are a few congested streets, and it will be for the residents within these streets to feed back, and they'll be the ones that will be influencing the objections to the traffic regulation order for the exemptions. There is a balance in this. So while parking on footpaths does reduce amenity, prevents active travel for pedestrians, we're also mindful as well about some of the challenges in small streets. Again, some of the practical natures of cul-de-sacs where people have been without objection managing with one of the footpaths being blocked for up till now without objections. And again, it's a number of different criteria, people picking up elderly relatives that need to be able to get near to the locations, a whole host of different reasons as well. The one about the pram, again, people trying to load up cars. So it is a balance, and again, we will be listening to the residents and there are any objections they may wish to raise for this, again, taking into account things like the displacement to other areas and some of the challenges as well from an equitable point of view. But we will also be consulting with the statutory consultees as well, which is our usual emergency services, bus operators and so forth as well.
Thank you, Mr McNaughton. I can see Councillor Short nodding. So presuming that was very, very helpful. I certainly found that helpful, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, again, this is national legislation and we're seeking to diversion this as little as possible, whilst obviously consulting local residents and making sure that arrangements as much as practical make sense as much as practical. Sorry. Unless there's anything else, I'll take that as agreed. Thank you, everyone. Next item then, please, Arlene.
Item 9, tenders received by Head of Design and Property. You have this for approval.
So this item is seeking approval to accept a total of 2 tenders with a combined expenditure in the region of 1.45 million for surveys, construction and infrastructure work across the city. The 2 tenders comprise Perth Road District Environmental Improvement to hard and soft landscaping, and a further key phase for the Broughty Ferry to Moneyfeith Active Travel Project, comprising a shared pedestrian and cycle path through Castle Green, the removal of Mill Street with a continued share path and landscaping to join the Esplanade. Bailey McPherson, please.
Thanks, Convener. I want to say something very positive about the tender that's coming forward in relation to the environmental improvements in Perth Road. It's been a little bit of time in the bringing forward, but that's not a complaint. I think I remember the original walkabout involving councillors was actually the councillors as existed prior to the last election, so it was a little bit, I think it was at the start of 2022. But I have to say, throughout the process, and this is my main point, throughout the process, the project manager has been extremely good at answering questions from myself and Councillor Crichton. We're very grateful for his positive approach, and I think these environmental improvements at the 3 sites of the Perth Road District Shopping Centre, from Miller's Wynd past Pennycook Lane and up to the triangle at Cinderns, will be well received by the community, and I'm just very grateful for the way in which this has been handled throughout. So grateful for that, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McPherson. I'm sure officers will appreciate those comments. Councillor Flynn.
Thanks, Convener. It probably goes without saying, I agree with Billy McPherson, first of all, about the Perth Road, but also goes without saying, following on from the previous comments with the Sustainable Transport Delivery Plan, that I really welcome the continuation of the good work between Broughty Ferry and Moneyfeith Active Travel Route. I think this is a fantastic project for the city. I think it sells the city really well from the active travel and sustainable transport. And I think we create a better, as it says in the document here, create a better, safer environment to walk, cycle, wheel, and to encourage both locals and visitors to enjoy a healthier lifestyle through being more active. What else can you say? It's actually an ideal situation, a perfect project, and thanks to everyone that's involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and I absolutely couldn't agree more. With projects like this, investing in infrastructure, you really can't overstate enough the benefits to people in terms of their mental health, in terms of their physical health, and I think we see the benefit of that for years to come. And as I say, I absolutely welcome this as well. I think it's great we'll see this project finally to completion, and indeed, it's a project that's got recognition, far and wide for its scope and its beauty. To be frank, it's a really lovely walk to do it, and I'm sure local members will really appreciate that as well. I see no other questions or comments, so can this item be agreed? Thank you. Next item, please, Arlene.
That takes us on to the confidential part of the agenda. Do you wish to deal with this in the usual way?
Members agreed to it. I believe there is a question from Bailey McPherson, so in that case, do we have to wait until press have left the call, Mr. Merry?
Thank you, Convener. Can I suggest, for the benefit of members and also the press and public, that this matter be held over until the final committee of the evening? We'll then ask the press and the public to leave, at which stage Bailey McPherson will be able to ask his question and have it answered in private.
I'm absolutely fine with that. Are you agreeable to that, Bailey McPherson?
Yeah, that seems a very sensible way of dealing with it, so thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Merry. So that takes us to the end of the Fair Work, Economic Growth and Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you, Convener. The next committee is the City Governance Committee.
Evening, folks. We'll just crack on with the business. Willie?
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, are there any declarations of interest?
See no one jumping to notify me, so we'll take that as a no.
Okay, thank you very much. There'll be no declarations. Takes on to item 2, which is Best Value Thematic Review Report. Could I ask you the recommendations?
Thanks very much, Willie. It's my pleasure to welcome Richard Smith and Brian Howarth to our meeting from Audit Scotland today. So I'm going to try and take this in two parts. If there are questions, I'll hand over to Brian in just a moment to give some introductory remarks. If there are questions for our colleagues from Audit Scotland, then I'll take them first, and then if there's any further questions for officers, I'll take them thereafter. So welcome and thank you for your patience so far. Brian, I believe I'm going to hand over to yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. As members are probably aware, the last time the best value report was done at Dundee City Council was in 2020. Just picking up on the last point in our key findings here is that since that time we've been completing annual follow-ups of the recommendations. The previous audit noted good progress on that, and we're able to conclude that the recommendations in the previous 2020 report have all been completed. And there's detail of that in Exhibit 7 on page 47 of your papers. Just to say overall, I think it's a good check-in and report on best value within the council. Some very good positives, clear vision and priorities captured in a good council plan, a very good performance framework, aligns well with the plan, accessible website on performance, and your own performance reporting we found to be very balanced and fair. It includes areas for improvement and not just areas that have been achieved. Just generally on performance, comparison over time, 22 of the LGBF performance indicators got better. So that's around 40% over the period that we looked at. You now have 41% of the indicators in the top 2 quartiles, which is up from 34% in 18-19. We very much recognise the challenges that you recognise as a council. The community engagement is key and a key part of the transformation plan. There's a very strong locality approach within the council, and we note the focus is on areas such as inequality and poverty focus. Obviously, there's a big climate change as well issue, which is being addressed with the plan to produce a net zero transition plan shortly. We're also happy to note that all the expected supporting plans that we would expect to see within the council, that's financial, workforce, asset, digital plans, are all in place. We do note around performance, the educational achievement, attainment, still, around half of the educational attainment measures remain in the bottom quartile. We also, within the latter part of the papers here, touch on an area which the Accounts Commission was obviously interested at last time the best value report was taken to them, which is around issues such as the drugs, deaths, etc., and the mental health issues within the area. That's all covered on page 48. We are in front of the Commission. Richard and I will be in front of the Commission in November to answer questions from them and for them to hear the report and to make any recommendations as a result. But I think overall it's a very positive report and notes the progress made by Dundee City Council since the last best value review. Happy to take any questions, Convener.
Ryan, thank you very much for that fantastic introduction, better than I could have done myself, so very much appreciated. And I think it's right to acknowledge that there has been progress against many of those areas identified within the thematic review. And I think, we collectively, I think, need to take some solace from the fact that the areas in which we've identified both progress and challenges in making progress are not of any surprise to any of us. So not only are we owning the fact that we need to make greater progress against some of these areas, that in many circumstances there is clear actions and a strategy to take that forward to ensure that we are making progress against every single possible outcome, because there is that collective view. And of course, there is regular reporting through committee, which provides all elected members with that ability to scrutinise and hold us all to account in the progress being made. So I certainly welcome the review, its contents, and the challenge that it presents to make sure that we are continuing to rise to the expectations both of the people of this city and, of course, of agencies like Audit Scotland as well. So with all of that said, I'm happy to welcome any questions to our colleagues. I'm not seeing any questions for Richard or Brian, so you've clearly done too good a job with your introductory remarks, Brian. All the questions will be for officers, so can I thank you both again, and I'll just come on to questions for officers. So Michael, bring you in at this point.
Thank you, Convener. I have a question I've previously banged on about community asset transfers, so I will do again. I welcome the proposal to replace the current CAP process. Can I ask, before this goes forward, if officers can give a little more detail about how they intend to simplify the process for asset transfers, and what's actually meant by when it says expand the range of options open to community groups going forward?
Okay, yeah, I'll just bring in the Chief Executive in the first instance. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Crichton, for the question. And I'm sure Marie Daly and the team can follow up after the committee meeting. What's meant by having more options is, although Brian and Richard found that there was very limited community asset transfers by that technical definition, what the council has been able to do, for example, is provide a lease to charitable or community organisations so that they can take occupancy of the building at a relatively low rent, but they're not exposed to the ongoing or maintenance costs associated with it. So what we're looking to do is just formalise that process and look at our community asset transfer to see whether there's a way to streamline it while still carrying out relevant due diligence. But at this point, it's to look and explore different ways we can allow the community and other groups to occupy more of our buildings should they become available or should they request to do so.
Happy with that, Michael?
Yeah, really happy with that. Just I'm really concerned about this for a long time, and if the council's doing anything it can to help the process, I acknowledge it's a really hard task, and what you don't want to do is just hand all the licence over to charitable organisations and for them to fall. So I know we have to do due diligence, and I thank Greg for that answer.
Thanks very much. And it seems the officers are also getting off lightly this evening. So if there are no further questions, can we agree this report, please? Thank you very much. Okay, Willie, we'll move on to the next item, but just to thank Richard and Brian for their attendance this evening. You're more than welcome to continue to watch proceedings or go and get your tea if you so wish. So thanks very much. Willie.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 then is a service plan for city development. You're asked to approve the plan.
Yep, hopefully this is relatively self-explanatory. Plan outlines the strategic direction for the service over the next 5 years, and clearly there's a lot contained within the service plan in terms of priorities over the lifetime of it, including some of the items that we've discussed tonight around sustainable transportation interventions, property rationalisation, the local development plan, and accelerating growth and job creating measures and interventions that we've talked about at committee numerous times. So with all of that said, I'll just come to the questions. Bailey McPherson, Fraser, you first. You're on mute.
Just as that came up, you're on mute, so thanks for that. A couple of questions, and I've got a request for the committee if it would be agreeable that we ask the Chief Executive to do something. I should first of all say I think this is an exceptionally well written report. It's got a lot of really good information in it, and it shows the breadth of work that is undertaken in the department. So full marks on that one. I just really wanted to know exactly the status of the information on page 91, and it gives in its key KPIs, and it gives information for 2021, 21, 22 and 5-year target. And I just want to be absolutely sure about the status of what we're meaning under the 2 financial years mentioned. And there's a particular statistic that jumped out at me that I wondered, is that a target as opposed to reality? And it's the percentage of residents who cycle. Now it says 2021, 26%, 21, 22, 32%, and the 5-year target is 36%. Now, I thought that was exceptionally high for the number of people who regularly cycle. And because I remember reading a Cycling UK report, so I went back to it, and across Scotland, Cycling UK's figures for Scotland are 7% of people in Scotland cycle for transport and another 9% cycle for leisure. They're 2021 figures. So I was just really wondering, are these 21-22 figures targets or actuality? And if it's as high as 32%, are we sure of the accuracy of it? What's the, you know, how do we gather that information? I would love to think that a third of people are regularly cycling. I'm just wondering if it's actually accurate or not.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for the question, Fraser. We've got Robin and Ewan on the call, so I'll go to you, Robin, in the first instance. Robin?
Thanks very much, convener. We'll need to drill down into the definition, but I suspect it is the definitional one. I think this will probably be something like percentage of residents who have cycled during the past year, or something like that. And potentially the other surveys is something like percentage of residents who cycle regularly. And that would bring in a whole group of people who perhaps cycle once or twice a year with kids or whatever. But we'll double check that and come back. The target as set out is something which is set in the city plan. And that's obviously what we're working towards.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think it's just useful to be clear as to what we're actually saying. I would say, apropos my previous comments about public transport, that's a bit of a dip in terms of public transport between 2021 and 21-22, and obviously we would want to see the 5-year target being met. But my second question is nothing to do with that, actually. It's to do with visitor numbers, and I would say that the information on visitor numbers appears positive in terms of bouncing back from the dip during the pandemic. However, and I think the couriers covered this, I was contacted by the media about the fact that some of the visitor figures apparently include Ukrainian refugees who we've welcomed to our city. And it would appear that GTS, who undertook the work, had a degree of difficulty in stripping out, if you like, tourism visitors, as opposed to those who are visiting our city for reasons of being refugees. As I say, I think we all agree that we're very much welcomed Ukrainian refugees to the city. I was just really wondering if officers could perhaps comment on that, and also comment on what I think is a very worrying thing, which is the news that Visit Scotland is intending to close its information centre at the V&A, which I think is very, very disappointing indeed.
Thanks, Fraser. I'll bring in officers in just a moment, but perhaps to pick up the second point first. So it is my understanding they have already closed that desk rather than they are going to close that desk. So that has already occurred. I have raised a number of concerns with Visit Scotland in relation to that decision-making process, because I was very concerned at the fact that I essentially received an email to tell me that the decision had already been taken and things had already moved on, in contrast to the approach that they took a couple of years ago, where they publicly announced that they were looking at a rationalisation, I suppose, of their portfolio or their desks across Scotland. They made all that very clear publicly. They set out the number of desks they were looking to reduce to, and none of that seems to have been undertaken during the current decision-making process. I'm also slightly concerned that, as I would think, a core partner for an organisation like Visit Scotland, I don't think we were consulted, and certainly I wasn't, and I'm sure I speak for the rest of the elected members to say that we weren't consulted. So I am concerned around that, and I would hate to think that we were potentially the only major city council without a desk, I suppose, for Visit Scotland. So that is something that I've written to them, and I'm happy to share any correspondence that comes back, and of course officers might have more to say on that. And on the first item as well, I'll bring in officers. So Robin, I'll come to you first.
Thanks, convener. The point that was raised about the impact of Ukrainian refugees staying in city hotels is a good one. Now, my understanding is that the people organising the survey, the STEAM data, have endeavoured to strip out the impact of this by excluding an entire hotel where it is known that the entire hotel is booked up for supporting refugees. What they haven't been able to do is to strip out where part of a hotel has been used, and obviously there is a risk that that distorts the figures. We simply don't have the ability to
combine their data with what we know about potential occupancy levels, because it'd be a very large statistical exercise. But broadly, we think that the majority of the refugees will have been taken out of that calculation. I think really it's only once the economy has returned to normal and there's evidence that the tourism economy has, and the war in Ukraine is resolved, I think then we'll get a fuller understanding of what the likely level of tourism Dundee settling out. But I think with your eyes, you can see there's a far higher proportion of particularly overseas tourists coming to the city at the moment. And I know that Tartan has been extremely popular. So I do think that regardless of the potential statistical anomaly over refugees partly occupying a hotel, I do think there's broadly a very positive news story here.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to Mr. Presswood and to yourself, convener, in relation to the other matter of Visit Scotland. Can I say I'm grateful that you will share whatever response you get from Visit Scotland. I feel pretty strongly about this, that this, I didn't even know it closed, and quite frankly picked it up from the local press, which is very, very disappointing on the part of Visit Scotland in terms of engagement. And if once that's shared, I would hope that there might be agreement cross-party that we perhaps, if we don't get a positive response to your engagement with them, if we write cross-party to Visit Scotland on the back of what response you get, assuming that is not the sort of positive response we want, which is we've changed our mind. So I'll be very interested to see what comes back from them, because I think it's really quite disappointing, particularly given, I mean, this report itself alludes to the fact that the city has bounced back in terms of visitor numbers. We've got attractions that frankly did not exist a few years ago. The mood, frankly, is positive in terms of tourism for Dundee, and it just seems an incredibly short-sighted decision on the part of Visit Scotland to do what they've done. Thank you, convener.
It does indeed, Fraser. Happy to share that and happy to have a further discussion about further representation to Visit Scotland, because I think reversing that decision, in my view anyway, would be relatively easy for them to do so. So happy to keep in touch with that and share any correspondence that comes back. So thank you very much. I'll move on to the next question, which is Daniel, I think. Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Convener. I'm back now. The service succession planning section on pages 81 and 82 show a rather worrying picture of the bulk of the department's staff being over 40 and quite a low number of younger staff who should become the more senior staff in directorate in the future. I'm sure this picture exists across the council and it's not just affecting this department. The service plan alludes to actions being taken to try and address this, which are sensible. But can I ask that either the Executive Director or the Chief Executive, if they think that they need to look again at rather flat structures and limited scope for promotion?
Thanks for the question, Daniel. I think it's fair to say that there's a piece of work that's been undertaken across the city to understand both the profile of our staffing, but also to think about that issue of progression and future-proofing, I suppose, the services of the council. And of course, it's not to say that we don't have many staff who are older, who are doing great things, because we need a good mixture of staff in our council with experience and skill set, as well as bringing in new opportunities for younger people as well. But I'll go to the Chief Executive in the first instance.
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Councillor Coleman, for the question. Workforce planning is something that the council is absolutely committed to. There have been a number of documents and information that have been issued by the organisational development team. We continue to try and offer modern apprentice opportunity, graduate opportunities for young people. However, the reality that we're in as an organisation is that we have got less staff than what we'd have previously. We have to consider how to drive efficiencies out the organisation while to maintaining services. But our mind is very focused on how we continue to make sure that individuals can progress within the council and also have a career in the relevant disciplines where we know there are significant challenges. So it's something that I'm confident we have the information and tools at our disposal, but I do think it'll take some considerable time before we see the benefit of that work coming through each of the individual service areas.
Thanks, Greg. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
Yes, thank you, John. Yeah, that's great, Greg. I mean, we're keen to avoid a situation where a whole load of folk retire at once and a whole load of knowledge just walks out the door. But it's good to hear that's in hand. Thank you.
Yeah, I was also going to make a flippant remark about the fact that at the age of 40, you might still have 40 years of service to go if the Tories have anything to do with it. So, but I shall move on to the next question. So, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I've probably got a bit few less years than you to do, but there we are. So, yeah, it's first of all just to commend the efforts that are being made to market the city. They are genuinely commendable, and I think we're seeing positive results. And my question is just a quick one around the statistics on page 93 regarding visitor numbers, which pleasingly, demonstrate a positive growth coming out of the pandemic. In fact, they're doing so well that I'm just wondering that they, given that what the 2022 to 23 numbers actually are, they're in fact ahead of the 5-year target. So on a positive note, I'm just wondering if that 5-year target actually needs to be revised upwards.
Thank you for the question, Craig. And I think it's fair to say, obviously, some of this is reported through the city plan in terms of those targets and reported through other reports as well. I'll bring in Robin in just a second, but I think your point's a good one in terms of continuing to raise the bar and be aspirational. And of course, we're working on the next phase of Dundee's offering in terms of the Eden project and looking to enhance and expand the number of people that are coming to the city. And I hope that that will continue over the next 5 years. But Robin, do you want to come in and offer a comment?
No, I think it's a legitimate challenge, and other elected members prior to committee have highlighted similar instances. And I think the key challenge, the 5-year target, is linked to historic city plan positions where appropriate. So we have a limited number of opportunities for increasing them, though we do, where possible, insert stretch targets in there, particularly when it's items like this where we have an ability to influence, not necessarily control, but to influence. In terms of the tourism numbers, I think for the reason that the conveners highlighted, it probably makes sense to review that 5-year target once we have more certainty about the timing of the arrival of Eden, the continued upgrading of other tourist attractions within the city, and I think members will be aware of the large number of proposals. And then obviously finally, per the previous discussion, the impact of refugees displaced by war in the Ukraine.
Thanks very much, Robin. And I think last on this item will be Councillor Short. Lynn.
Sorry, convener, I'm confusing everybody tonight, including myself. It wasn't a point of order. It was actually a question stroke comment, and it really goes back to what Bailey McPherson was discussing with regards to the lack of tourist information. I recently was speaking to someone and suggested that they got in touch with the Dundee and Angus Convention Bureau, and then when I googled it, it turns out that it's now the Dundee City Region Convention Bureau, and I think maybe perhaps it's something that we should be hopefully looking at as a more robust pushback, really, that Dundee might be sitting there with a big offering, but it's beyond just Dundee now. It's about that whole Tay Cities region and the Tay Cities deal, and actually we're promoting the whole area from that stand. And is it possible to use the whole region rather than just the city? So having discussions with our colleagues in the neighbouring local authorities, so that it's a louder voice. That was all I was hoping to bring to the table. And I'd also had a question from someone that some of you might know from officer level, Jock Stout, and he was asking about the fact that the new BT hubs, can they perhaps provide some very quick online information that might be quite useful in the short term with regards to what's on offer in the area?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lynn. I'll just go to Robin on that one. Robin?
I don't honestly know the answer to the BT hub. I know they propose various telecoms opportunities, 5G, etc., and I think charging for your phone. But in terms of whether that presents an opportunity to us to promote Dundee for tourism, I couldn't be certain. We'll certainly reach out to them and see whether there are any opportunities. I suspect, in view of the fact that they are advertising hoardings, I suspect that there will be a commercial consideration, and obviously we do need to prioritise a very limited budget for that. My apologies, I've actually forgotten the first part of your question, Councillor Short. Could you remind me, prompt me?
Yeah, sure. It was to talk as a region as opposed to just Dundee.
Right, apologies. Yeah, the rebranding of the Convention Bureau, I think, reflects the nature of the partnership. It's always a partnership between various different local authorities, and the branding, I think, has to reflect the reality of the geography that we're serving, but it also reflects the nature of the partnership that supports it. So similarly to other initiatives, we will periodically review the title. I think it's essential that if it relates to Dundee, it does have Dundee in the title. And therefore, although we think strategically across the whole of the Tay Cities region, where it's simply promoting Dundee and surrounding area, it is very important that the title of the initiative does reflect that.
Right, thank you very much for that response. And there's no other questions on this item, so can I take this as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie, we'll move back to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Takes on to item 4, Capital Expenditure Monitoring Report. You're asked to note this.
Again, I don't think this needs any introduction, so I'll just ask if there's any questions for officers on this. Fraser.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's a question about the information in 5.25 on page 107 regarding the Riverside recycling site, which indicates a reduction in projected expenditure of just over £500,000 in 23-24. I notice it doesn't seem to figure in the figures at all at Appendix 2 later on in the report. I was just really wondering if we could have some more information regarding what's essentially been dropped. I note that it's now going to be part of a match funding bid being prepared for submission to the Scottish Government's Recycling Improvement Fund. And I was just really wondering what plan B is if we don't get the match funding, given that obviously the original expenditure that was due in 23-24 is not now going ahead.
Thanks for that question, Fraser. I'll just bring in Tony to offer his insight. Tony?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Billy McPherson. Yeah, that 518,000 will form part of a match funding bid. The 518k would be the council's contribution to a much bigger fund that we're looking to resource from the Recycling Improvement Fund from the Scottish Government. So the 518 would be spent as part of the wider project next year. Part of it would be spent this year if we can get the funding in time. But of course, all of that is predicated on us getting that confirmation of funding from the Scottish Government, Convener.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Tony, it's I suppose helpful to say that that £518,000 is there. If we are unsuccessful, that remains, and it will be a smaller project in nature if we're unsuccessful, which hopefully that isn't the case.
Yes, Convener, sorry, yes, that was a point that Billy McPherson just asked about there as well. Yeah, so we're going to try and maximise what we can with the council funding, but of course you're correct in that if we're unsuccessful in getting that competitive element from the Scottish Government, we'll look at a smaller project. We just want to try and maximise the potential through that funding.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser.
Yeah, could I just come back to Mr. Boyle there? Could you give us an indication, assuming let's look on the happy, sunny side upside, and that we get the match funding from the Recycling Improvement Fund, what would that actually give us in terms of actual actions to improve the facilities at Riverside?
Tony, if you've got an overview, or if you want to provide a greater detail in email as well, might be helpful.
Yeah, I'll provide a greater detail in an email, Convener Bill McPherson. But largely, it's going to be about increasing recycling capacity, in short, but I'll provide that in writing.
Yeah, no, that's much appreciated, Mr. Boyle. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I think that's the only question on this. So can I take this item as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie?
Okay, thank you. Takes on to item 5, Revenue Monitoring Report. Again, this item is for noting.
Again, standard report in terms of the update, but clearly the General Fund is currently projecting an overspend of 4.2 million against the position that was expected, and there is an overspend anticipated within HRA, £600,000. Now, of course, these fluctuations happen throughout the course of the year, and officers will be taking action to make sure that the balance is there at the year end, but I'll welcome any questions at this point. Fraser, back to you.
Just a brief one in relation to statistics on page 127 at 5.2. It indicates, quote, reduction in projected staff costs underspend within neighbourhood services of £188,000. That's almost sounds to me like a double negative. So I just want to be clear that I've understood that correctly. Is what we're saying that there have been persons appointed that has meant that the projected underspend is actually going to be less than it was going to be? Because that would obviously be positive in terms of getting unfilled posts filled. And I'm just really wondering what in reality that's actually trying to tell us.
Yeah, that's my understanding, Fraser, but I'll defer to Robert just to clarify. Robert?
Apologies, Convener. I don't have the details, but Mr. Thompson may be able to help. If not, we'll come back to the committee with details.
Paul?
Thank you for the question, Bailey McPherson. I would confirm that your understanding is correct.
Okay, thanks for that. It would be useful to get a little bit more detail as to, you know, what the appointments are and so on. I'm conscious of the fact that from previous emails with the department that there were a number of vacancies, previous emails I've had with Mrs. Furlane, so it would be helpful to get a little bit more detail, but I'm happy with that tonight. Thanks, Mr. Thompson.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the brevity, Paul. Always good to get a non-politician's answer. So I think that's the last question. Sorry, I'm jumping between screens here. Yes, it is. Can I take this item as agreed, please? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next one. Willie.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Item 6 then is the annual Treasury Management Activity Report. You're asked to give the recommendations.
Yep, again, this is an annual update on the Treasury Management. Any questions on this? No. Can I take that as agreed? Thank you very much. Billy.
Okay, thank you. Takes you on to item 7, a Human Rights Bill for Scotland consultation. You're asking you the proposals.
So this is an important consultation for us to respond to. You'll see the response that's been collated as part of the appendix as well, and it advises members about the proposed consultation on that new human rights bill, which is designed to bring in into law, I suppose, the 4 international rights treaties and to introduce a new right to a healthy environment as well. So I think hopefully there is broad support for that. I'm seeing nobody jumping to suggest otherwise. So can I take this item as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie.
Okay, thank you. Item 8 then is antisocial behaviour report. This is for noting.
Thank you very much. The report gives an overview of the cases dealt with by the antisocial behaviour team between the 1st of April and 30th of June. I anticipate there'll be some questions on this, particularly from a local perspective, so I will just come to questions and comments. Charlie.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. It's just to again thank the team for bringing these statistics to us and telling us and giving us information about some of the reasons why antisocial behaviour is a bit of a scourge, particularly in certain wards, and I include my own in that. One of the things I did at the last committee ask for a briefing on antisocial behaviour from the antisocial behaviour team about antisocial behaviour in Lochee, and I was absolutely delighted that Tom Stirling and Gillian Lamb organised a multidisciplinary group who could have from the community, from police, from different agencies, and they were able to have a conversation about the in-depth intelligence that I think we need to understand where are the hotspots, why are there hotspots in these areas. We're just reporting general trends and statistics, but it was really, really helpful that they went out of their way, including staying after 5 o'clock in the evening. It was just good that they were able to take part in that. And I think that what we agreed was that we need to start thinking about the narrative. Yes, we have a situation of antisocial behaviour in many of our communities, but there's also a lot of good stuff going on in terms of, trying to diversionary activities. And we were discussing a lot of these at that meeting. So I think that the narrative might need to change slightly, that we don't just get the report statistics that say this is how bad things are, but perhaps we get a little bit of information about what positive steps are being taken in order to resolve some of these issues. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me, for example, that Charleston is one of the highest areas of antisocial behaviour in Scotland. But then again, if you look at the occurrence of antisocial behaviour, you get a lot of questions about noise in housing. And we know we've got a very kind of aged tenemental block system in parts of Charleston that are maybe leading to that. So I think strategically it's something we want to look into in the future. But it was really good to get that information from officers, and I think it was a really good meeting, and I certainly enjoyed it. And I'd also like to thank Tom for passing on my gratitude to the antisocial behaviour team, which I always express when we get these reports, and he feeds that back directly to our colleagues who do a fantastic job under a great deal of pressure. That was my comment, Convener.
Thanks very much, Charlie. That's really appreciated, and I'm sure the team really appreciate that. And like you, I've always found the team to be really good to work with and also receptive to suggestions and engagement from the community. I think they do a very difficult job, and sometimes they want to do more, but obviously aren't always able to do so, depending upon the situation they find themselves in. And you're right to highlight some of the good work. It's not, of course, just the antisocial behaviour team working in isolation. It works with teams across other disciplines, and the youth diversion area, of which obviously the administration just brought forward a report recently with an additional £200,000, is certainly something that we would want to see more of, given some of the challenges in our communities as well. And you know, I think it's worth highlighting that there is a lot of good work in those areas as well, despite all the challenges that we're facing. And I see that Councillor Flynn is agreeing with you as well.
Can I just come back in before Councillor Flynn? I noticed Councillor
I think
Flynn,
he was just agreeing with you, Charlie.
Yeah, I know,
in.
but there's been too much agreement recently. I mean, you've agreed with me on a number of occasions about different things, and now we've got Councillor Flynn, and I'm kind of getting a bit worried here that maybe I'm losing my critical edge that I used to have as I gain in years. So I'm grateful to Councillor.
Oh, Charlie, I think I've lost you. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I've just gone off camera and off mic, and delighted that Martin Flynn's disagreeing with me now. No, I'm not. That was a joke. It's very good to get that kind of consensus going forward on something that's a blight for our entire city, and it's great to hear the work that's being done. But there's still lots of challenges going ahead. So that's me finished, Convener.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thanks for your comments. Okay, I see no other comments or questions on this. Can I take this item as agreed, please? Thank you very much. We'll move on again.
Okay, thank you. Takes you on to item 9, firework control zones, and you're asking the recommendations.
Obviously, I think we've all had a keen interest in both the legislation and the issue of fireworks more broadly, and you'll be aware of the background to this in terms of the national legislation when it came into force and the process in which we have to undertake consultation and engage with communities. And I think it's right when we reflect on the recommendations within this report that it really is led by our communities, and there is a process in place to make sure that not only is it identifying needs within communities, but then collaborating with Scottish Fire and Rescue, Police Scotland and others, including the antisocial behaviour team, to ensure that whatever comes forward thereafter is right, it's appropriate, proportionate, and it will meet the expectations of the community as well. You of course can't just have a blanket ban across the city, and this process allows that consultation and engagement with communities, I think, to get this in the best possible place it can be. We've also, I suppose, got to be mindful of the time of year we are at and what is approaching us in terms of bonfire night and some of the activities that generally take place in our communities, and working with both those agencies that I mentioned, as well as council services, to make sure that we lessen the impact on our communities and not see a repeat of what we saw last year, which was completely unacceptable, and it is of no solace that we saw similar scenes in places like Edinburgh and elsewhere in England. To say that happened in Dundee, it shouldn't have happened. Our communities shouldn't be living in fear at any point during the year, and we need to make sure that we continue to work to address those underlying issues. And I know, finally, just for reference, that my colleagues, after having conversation just recently with local MSPs, have been undertaking further work with local supermarkets, as we saw last year, to ensure that where, again, appropriate and proportionate, those supermarkets are not selling fireworks in a way that is going to be, unhelpful within our communities as well. And I know they've had some positive feedback on that, which again, I'll ask for absolute clarity, and I'm happy to share, and I'm sure my colleagues will be happy to share what is happening with those conversations. But with all of that said, I will stop talking at this point and bring in colleagues. So I think, Daniel, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Convener. I'd like to thank firstly, Mr. Sterling, for the time he took to discuss this matter with me a couple of weeks ago now. However, I do have to say, I don't think the Council moved fast on this matter. The legislation came into effect on 22nd of June, and the statutory guidance was made available that same day. But we are now at the tail end of September, and this report is now coming forward. I appreciate resources are stretched, I know that only too well, but I do feel this should have been given an absolute priority, and I had that discussion, and it will not come as a shock to anybody that this legislation was indeed coming out. However, clearly we've now missed the boat for 2023 for bringing in any control zones, and given the concerns that we have previously discussed at length with our police and fire and rescue partners about the events, the unacceptable events of 2022, could we have not had this report at the summer, the recess subcommittee at the start of the summer to allow community and partner engagement far earlier than now? And lastly, Mr. Convener, can I also ask specifically how the recommendation committing the Council to undertake wider communication and awareness raising across the city will actually be carried out?
Thanks for the question, Daniel. And I think it's helpful to ask those questions, particularly on the timing. It's a question I asked myself, but I think we also need to be really clear on what was provided and what information was still required. And I'll ask officers to come in just a moment. And my understanding from the feedback that I had at the time was not just about the legislation and some of that information that was published after our final committee meeting, which took place on the 26th of June. There was further guidance that we were awaiting to clarify some of the positions and some of the information contained within that legislative guidance. So it wasn't the case that necessarily just because the legislation outline was published that we had all of the information available. And of course, we have to work back from a position of 8 to 12 weeks of consultation. So my understanding, I don't wish to speak for officers, I'm sure they're big enough to speak for themselves here, is that no matter the position that we took, because we were still waiting on clarification around some of that, we would not have been in a position to take forward any control zones in time for Burns Night this year. Burns Night. I'm getting ahead of myself now, haven't I? You know exactly what I mean. So I will come to officers just to offer some clarification. I think, Tom, in the first instance, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think our analysis of the timescale and the logistics of going through that, the process would have been such that even if we'd started right away, digested the guidance, and then drew up proposals, because you have to have something to consult on. Our estimation certainly was that we would not have been able to put a zone in place in time for the kind of October, November period this year. And I think we're in line with, I'm not aware of any other local authorities that have put in place zones for this year. In terms of raising awareness about the zones, our intention would be to go through local community planning partnerships to do that, and we can look at a timetable for doing that. After today, we'll start to work on that, and how to, as I say, make communities aware of this as an option.
Thanks, Tom. That's helpful. And I've got no other questions on this item, so can I take this item as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks on item 10, site investigation and contaminated land framework. Could I ask you the recommendations?
Hopefully self-explanatory, but just a reminder, don't jump off the call immediately after this item because we have to circle back. So no questions on this item. Can I take that as agreed? Thank you very much. That's all the items for city governance. I'll hand you back to committee services.
Thank you, Convener. The final committee this evening, before we return to Bailey McPherson's question, is the Neighbourhood, Regeneration, Housing and Estate Management Committee.
Good evening, and over to you, Willie. Just crack on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, are there any declarations of interest?
I see none, so let's move on, please.
Okay, thank you. There'll be no declarations. Item 2 then, before his procurement of retrofit assessor consultancy services for Glenprosen, Lawton and Lunlaffin Phase 1. You're asked to read the proposals.
Just any questions or comments to officers on this? I don't see any, so we'll just take that as agreed. Thank you very much, and that's the business.
Thank you, Convener. As indicated earlier, we now return to Bailey McPherson's question on item 10 of the Fair Work, Economic Growth and Infrastructure Committee. Could I please ask that all members of the press and public now leave the meeting, as this matter will be dealt with in private, and I'll ask Mr. Waddle to confirm when all members of the press and public have left. Thank you.